Hey friends, it's Stephanie here, the host of the Only God podcast, sharing stories that only God could write. And today on this episode, we have Toshali Nutt, and she's going to share her adoption story. And I got to say, I could not hold back the tears on this one. But if I kind of wrap it up in maybe two words or two themes that I feel like she shared was trusting God and gratitude. So I look forward to you being able to hear Tashali's story. Hey, Tashali.
Hi.
It's so wonderful to see you. You're joining us from Oklahoma, I think, in the middle of the country. So thank you for joining the Only God podcast, where we share and tell stories that only God could write. And so I would love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about yourself, whatever you want to.
So I am a 29-year-old registered dietitian, or I'm 28, but I'm about to turn 29. So people say 30, so I'll just be on 30. But I am a dietitian, and so I cover a lot of like rural areas in Oklahoma and get to meet some really incredible people. And I love to travel. I love to drink a good cup of coffee in the morning and just have like a slow morning. Yeah, and I've been trying to get better at, like, exercising and walking and just being more, like, to the day-to-day versus, like, overall, focusing on the day-to-day. So, yeah, I've been a busy gal, but trucking along.
Love that. And I feel in shock when you said 29 because I met you in your late teens maybe?
Huh?
So like a decade ago, which is crazy. You're still like that teenager to me. Maybe you will always be. And I love what you said of the day to day. I think that's very important. I think we can get wrapped up in overwhelmed with thinking about everything we have to do in a week, a month, a year, what's coming up, and that taking it day at a time. I like how you said, like, have that slow morning, your cup of coffee, and working in some of those healthy things. So I love that about you.
Oh, thank you.
I would love for you to share from your perspective our only God connection. So how we met and how God brought us together.
So this is just crazy because it was 2015. That's when.
Maybe, yeah,
Yeah,
somewhere around in that time frame.
somewhere a long time ago. So we met in 2015, and actually, I got invited to go on a trip to Alaska. And what was crazy is, the guy leading the trip kept saying, "You should go to Alaska. You should go to Alaska." And I was like, "No, no, no." I didn't think it was gonna work out. Um, but somehow, some way, I got on the trip. But I knew everybody on the trip except for one lady, and we all were like, "Some random lady is joining us." And we were all a little skeptical. And I was just like, "Oh no, okay, so we have to make her feel included." But there was only three of us, or two girls, and then plus the random lady. So we're like, okay, we got to be like inclusive, find a way to make sure she feels comfortable. We had no idea. And lo and behold, it was Stephanie Jones. And honestly, that trip goes down one of the best in history because you were not a part of our group at the time, but you decided to join this leadership missions trip in Alaska. And that is just how we met. Like, you were brave enough to join some teenagers, some younger adults, to put on a leadership camp for some youth and work with the church there. And so that was a week of cold and good food and some good laughs.
A lot of good laughs, right?
Yeah.
I know I didn't get any sleep. No sleep. You girls. So I had to stay at a house with Toshali and two other girls. Then the guys were at a separate house. And I'm not kidding. I think I slept like 4 hours in 6 days or whatever we were there for. It
Yeah.
felt very old after that trip with you guys. What I love about that too is like looking back, I can't believe I did that. And I think sometimes maybe God blinds us to the craziness of the things that he is calling us to do. And because I had never met anybody, I mean, I flew to Dallas, and the first time that I met any of you. I'd seen these guys online. That's how I met them, was seen them on a Facebook group. And I remember my husband being like, "You're doing what? You're flying to Alaska? Like, are you sure this is legit?" And I just really felt like it was something that God was calling me to do. And then, like, on your case too, of like you said, is like you didn't want to go and kind of this avoidance. And I think sometimes when God wants you somewhere, like he will
Mhm.
make a way to get you there. Also, like, so I would like to share with the audience, if this is the first time you're listening, is I don't have any children. I think at that time in 2015, let's just use that date. I think it's that year, a little, yeah, I think it's that year, is I think 2013, my husband and I had wrapped up infertility treatment. So we had done IVF, we had done everything for years. We had been married a decade. But I had been at peace with not having any children. And do you want to share a little bit about like what happened on that trip and what you guys called me, and then I'll share a hot minute about that.
Yeah. So I think it's funny because we'll say the 3 girls that went were in our, younger 20s, teens, and we are kind of expecting someone close to our age girl-wise to come. And so it was Stephanie, who is honestly, I don't know what your age was at the time, but you were
I was almost 40.
yeah. So
Yeah.
we through the trip, I just think like there was this like motherly, like just like a bit like a mama bear with us. And I don't know, for some odd reason during that trip, it was just like the Lord knew at the time, like these girls need a lady like this in their life. And so we kind of started to joke, like, that's our mom, mom, mom. Like, we quit saying Stephanie. We're like, mom. And there was a point, I'm gonna start crying. There was a point in the trip where just, usually you bond with the people when you spend that much time with them, like, you get to know them pretty well. And there was a time, I think it was closer to the end, where we had done like a closing circle. And we didn't know Stephanie's background. We didn't know that calling her mom actually really meant something, not just to her, but to us. And so we're all getting teary eyed and we're in this circle and we were giving shout outs. And it was just like the whole entire trip, Stephanie is like, you guys need anything? I'm always here for you. Like you need some ibuprofen. I got it. Like you want me to get your food? Like just these motherly characteristics that really just shot out of her, not just to us girls, but also to the guys. And we were all just like blown away. Like the Lord really sent like the sweetest lady to be with us. And we were all like, oh, we still had this like, oh, we don't know. But in that closing circle, I just remember thinking like, for my life, I'm like, man, the term mom comes in so many different ways. And, I think like the stereotype is like, well, they're your mom if they're blood, and that's not always true. And so it was like, "You are like a mom to us." And so, it's not always, like, blood that makes someone a mom, and I just remember that so, like, vividly, and we were all like, "Whoa, what just happened?" And it's so true because it's like you something that you desire, you still got and you still do fulfill, and so it was really God in that to say, like, "Okay, you don't have to have your own children to be a mom, like, you can be a mom in other ways, and it just looks so different in different settings." And so that's where mom came about, and then, we've stayed connected over the years and just love you as our mom.
And you guys have made trips to Indiana on multiple occasions, and I've been to Oklahoma on multiple occasions. And it's interesting you remember that moment, because it is a defining moment. Is we were in prayer. I remember being up on that little stage, and I remember it was like God whispered, is you did not have to birth these girls to be their mother. And that like really hit me. And I think that's probably when I shared with everybody of, a little bit about my story. And I want to go into your story because it kind of leads into that. And I want to for the guest, the next guest that we are going to have is Shanda, and we actually met Shanda when we were in Alaska on
Mhm.
that trip, and she lives in Alaska. And I will share an only God moment, only God story with Shanda. But that came about because as we were praising and worshiping, and I want you to remember this as Toshali tells her story, is I'm standing next to Toshali, and I look down and I just see her praise and worshiping here in the United States. And I knew her story that she's getting ready to share with you. And I lost it. I couldn't handle it. I had to run to the bathroom. And when I went to the bathroom, is there was only probably one other gal who was a little bit my age. I think I'm older than her that I could have talked to in that moment, and Shanda happened to be in the bathroom, and I that was an only God moment for me also because I'm thinking, this church is full, everybody's out there, I have to leave because 'cause I'm so overwhelmed in the moment, and then God put the one person that I needed in that bathroom, and so, just I wanted to fill that in because when the listeners listen to your story and then hear Shanda, they're gonna say, "Oh my gosh, like, look what God was doing through a bunch of different people miles and miles away." So I would love for you to share your only God story and start wherever you want.
So if you're watching, you can see that Stephanie and I look nothing alike. And I love just saying that, but I also don't have a different type of accent or anything. But I was adopted whenever I was 10 months old from Calcutta, India to an all American family, like true country, American, red, white, and blue, like all American family. And so it started before I was even born, which is crazy. And my mom loves to tell the story. Golly. So it's crazy because it really is just only God. But she had 3 boys, and her and my dad wanted a daughter, but they had told her that she couldn't have any more kids. And so she was wanting to see about the process of adoption. But really, they didn't make, like, a ton of money because my mom was a stay-at-home mom and my dad was working full-time, but not making, like, a ton of money, and she watched a commercial of just, like I don't know exactly what the program was, but it was just, like, feeding children, and so she really felt like it was laid on her heart to maybe support that organization, but it got more to that. She felt like she needed to adopt a child. There were multiple times where they didn't, like, qualify to adopt from different countries. She ended up like, my dad, I guess, thought he was just supporting, an organization, but really it was my mom saying, like, "We're gonna adopt a child." And so, finally, India was one of the countries that they could. And so my mom said every day she was at the courthouse just trying to get paperwork, do everything they needed to do, like home visits, just all of the honestly, like, red tape things kind
Right.
of on the back end of trying to meet these qualifications. And she said at times, like, she just felt really defeated because she was never sure if it was actually going to happen. She was never sure if, something was going the ball was gonna drop in some way or another. But she went through an organization in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they ended up giving her India and then giving her the orphanage where I was at. And they didn't really care about like what type of child. And I say that because like there is like a type in a way
Right.
of like, do you want someone with disabilities or do you health concerns, things like that. And they weren't picky. They just wanted like a healthy child is what they were praying for. And so my mom said that she got a call and they had told her that they had paired me with somebody. um, they told her my birthday. So my mom and my birthday is the same. And so that's when she knew. She's like, I just knew that you were the one. And so I came over, I think it was June or July of 97. So the orphanage ladies brought me over with another baby and brought me to my American family, which I've only ever known. I don't know my birth parents, and I'm always okay with that, which is weird because I have like this peace that I don't really question it because people ask me that a lot. Like, do you want to know who your birth parents are? And I'm like, it'd be cool, but I have my parents. Like, I have really good parents, and they have They have given me a home and the things that I needed that I couldn't have had if it wasn't for my mom following, like, the will of the Lord and just persevering through some of that stuff. So that and I think it was, like, a culture shock, not to me, but to the people around, like, in the community that I grew up in because it was very uncommon
Right.
for international adoption. And, people have their opinions and the things that they wanna say, but my mom was very confident and knowing that, "No, you belong here."
Yeah.
So it's been I don't know, when I think about it, I'm like, "This is awesome." Like, "This is the best thing ever."
Yeah, you had this, amazing life coming in and, 3 older brothers, and, you're coming in as the baby, and yeah, a totally different life than what you woulda had if you would've, maybe not been adopted or went somewhere else, and you kind of blew past something in your story. Well, first of all, I wanna say, like, how amazing for your mom is, like, I think so many times God whispers some things that just seem crazy. Like, like you said, is through that commercial. And we started this conversation about that overwhelm and that like looking long term and living day to day. And it sounds like your mom did that really well of like, I know so many friends that have adopted and it is overwhelming and it takes a lot of time and it is easy to quit. But if you just kind of keep taking that, okay, next step, what's the next paper? Or what's the next thing I got to check off is, like her reward at the end of the day was sweet Toshali coming here and she getting you as, her daughter. I also want to comment too of, it's still call me mom and that doesn't take anything away from your mom
Right.
and the life that she has given you. And so I want to say that for listeners if they're like, "Wait, what? And how does she?" like it's something I just want to say. So I think that's cool. Now, you kind of blew past something did your parents ever go to India, visit an orphanage or visit you before? Or did they not like meet you until you were here? Was that the first time they saw you? Did they get any pictures of you? Did they know anything about you? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
So they sent one of those, like, little throwaway cameras, I can't think of what it's called, but they
Yeah,
sent one of those over
disposable.
there disposable. They sent one of those over there, and then they got pictures back of me in the orphanage, and so those are the only pictures that I have, and then I have a little newborn picture from when I was born in the hospital, and so that was, like, a big deal that I was born in the hospital because I was considered more up to in the Indian culture, like, lower of the, caste system, and so I was taken from the hospital to the orphanage, and from what I know is they just said my mom was just very young and couldn't care for me, and so growing up or so to backtrack, my parents did not go to India. They ended up just paying for the tickets for the lady and her son to bring me over and with another baby who was getting adopted. So the first time that they saw me was when I was in the Tulsa airport.
And this lady, did she work at the orphanage or?
Yeah, she
Okay.
was what I would say, like, the caretaker, and she just made sure that all the babies were loved on and cared for, and, the pictures, I would love to share them with you guys, are just, you're like, "Oh my goodness, these babies," but they did the best they can with what they had and really
Right.
tried to just show love, to the babies that were there. Yeah, they ended up bringing another, little girl over who got adopted to a family.
Okay, very good. So is there any, because your story has a part two to it. So is there anything with this like part one that you want to share or haven't covered that you think is important to your only God story?
Yeah, so one thing I really appreciated about my family is that they never tried to hide that I was adopted. My mom always wanted me to know, like, I was just as loved as everybody else, and that even though my skin looks different, that doesn't make me lesser of a person, and it's just I think it always throws people off when I start to talk because they're like, "Oh, she should have an accent," and I'm like, "Now I feel uncomfortable." I was fortunate enough to go to the same, like, lower or, middle school elementary school, middle school, and high school. So everyone that I went to school with knew, like, my family was an all-American family and I was adopted. And so it was a big deal. And even the church that I grew up in, it was just like, she's adopted, her parents adopted her. And so I just always knew, but there never was like a bad connotation with it. It was always like a positive thing to know. I never was treated differently growing up either. People will ask me, well, did your parents, like, were they mean to you? And I'm like, they were never any different with me than they were to my three older brothers.
Yeah. I love that, and thank you for sharing that because I do think it's important for people to hear, maybe somebody who's been adopted or somebody who's thinking about adoption of yeah, and I know there's a lot of it's complicated and everybody has their own reasons of why they choose to share and not share, like all of that, and, so thank you for sharing that piece of your story. Is there anything else that you wanna share within that?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, do you wanna jump to the second half of this story?
Yeah, so I guess there's kind of like a middle part. So
Yeah, no, go for it.
when I was 11, the church family that I had, my pastor was very just adamant about me getting to see where I was from because he just felt like it was important. But we all know traveling internationally is costly, and so it just didn't ever seem like possible. But the church that I grew up in, he made a way. He wanted me to see where I was from. He just felt like it was very important. And so the church raised money for me to go on this missions trip, and it was a very tight-knit group. But at 11 years old, I got to fly back to India with my dad. My mom didn't get to go, but my dad did, and some of the close knit family, our church family, went along and we got to do some medical missions. And I'm gonna be honest, I was culturally shocked. 11 years old, like, looking through, and as I get older, I think, like, wow, at 11, like, it is an actual culture shock. I didn't realize, like, how fortunate I was and how blessed I was until I got off the plane in India and the time change. I am like, why is the time changed? I couldn't understand, and I couldn't understand some of the cultural aspects that they incorporate every day. People looking at me and thinking, well, she's one of us. And I'm like, I don't feel that way. Um, and then everyone else being around me with white colored skin, and it was just a big shock, and I didn't ever want to go back after that because I felt like it was just not as great as America. There were just certain things like I couldn't have chocolate milk, I couldn't have a hamburger. It's hot, it's sticky. The water here is not great. It smells. I remember telling my mom when I came back, like, Mom, it smells so bad. And it's just, it could be the part of where we were at too, like, geographically, but there were just other things that I realized. I was focusing more on the negative at 11
Right.
than I was when I, got older. So it was such a different experience at 11 and something that I will always cherish, but I think it was only to help prepare me for what was coming in the future.
Yeah. I'm glad you shared that, and I'd forgot about that. So I'm glad you shared that middle. And I mean, what a gift that your church gave you though. Like, it really does seem like your pastor had very good intentions of doing that. And I also when you share that, I feel like so many people in our country are so entitled. They've never, maybe left their city, their state, or this country. And I always challenge people go live in another country for a while. I mean, I can remember going to Honduras and it just changes your perspective about because the things you complain about here, it's like nothing to complain. Like you said, I mean, it's simple things that you probably took for granted before and given you were 11, but like you said, is chocolate milk, a hamburger, clean water, like air that doesn't smell, all of those things. And so, did you have when you came back, and maybe you don't remember, and that's okay, like a more gratefulness or gratitude that you didn't expect because now you got to see this difference of, you know, how good it was where you were living versus, where you could have been growing up?
Yeah, I remember there was a time where I just remember, like, thanking my parents because I was like, "Whoa." this is different. I don't know how I could have made it. I don't know if I would have made it actually. Because when you're put into an orphanage, like they pretty much kick you out after a certain point if no one adopts you. And so it just is crazy because even then I was like, God, why me? Like out of all of these little babies, like why me? And so it did. It opened up my eyes a little bit more to see, but there was like the side of it. I remember I'm like, Mom, I just don't know if I would ever make it over there.
Yeah, maybe God knew that. And God has a reason or a purpose that he brought you here, and I think it was that story that made me, kinda going back to that night in Alaska and just, like, looking down and like you said, of out of all the little babies, in India, God chose to bring you over here with this family, and you happen to, like, get with this group and have these friends that go to Alaska, and now you're in Alaska worshiping God, and it like, only God. It so overwhelmed me that, like, God was in every one of those details of your story in your life. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that the last part of your story.
So I remember just a little like wrestling with God a little bit of, but do I want to go back to India? Is that something that I desire? And there were a group of some of my friends that had went to India and they were like, man, this was the best trip ever. And I think that's kind of what planted that seed of like, I want to go back to India. I want to, experience it as a young adult. And it was the summer of I think it was 2017, if I remember correctly. And I got asked that summer with the job that I worked with, like what would be like a goal of mine and one of my bucket list items. And I was like, to go to India. And what was crazy is I'm in a room with a bunch of young adults, and there were a couple of people that said that. And
Wow.
I was fortunate enough to work with this group who strive to really push people to achieve some of their bucket list items. And my boss at the time was like, "Why don't we go? Like, we have connections, like, why don't we let's go on a trip to India." But my goal for that trip was for me to plan it and then for me to see, like, the orphanage where I was from, and that was, like, the biggest goal that I had, It was like, if we do some leadership stuff, if we serve in the church, or if we do some other activities, like, that's great, but my main goal is to have my friends come with me and us do some leadership training, and then I wanna see where I'm from. So everybody that was with me, they knew. They're like, "We're gonna see where she's from. We're gonna go to the orphanage." So a lot of planning, but just wild because it actually happened. I don't know how. I don't know like how much time and effort, but I was like, "I'm planning this trip and we're going." And so planned the trip and some of my college friends got to go with me, and then some friends that I worked with got to go. And my biggest thing was just finding a connection to the orphanage so I could go and see where I was from. And so that was
I was
reason.
surprised too. I think you invited me on that trip, but sadly I didn't go. Kind of regret that decision now. Work probably prevented me. But were you shocked that the orphanage was still there? I mean, because now this is 20 years later. Like, was that even like, had you kept up with the orphanage? Did you know that it was still there? Or did you kind of discover this after you set that goal of like, hey, I want to go back to India. Now I even need to see if it's still there?
I think it was kind of like in the middle of my planning.
Okay.
I remember asking my mom, like, "Do you remember the name?" And she sent me the information, and she was like, "Hey, don't be surprised if it's not there." And I was like, "Okay." And thankfully, through some of the connections that we had in India, they're like, "No, we can set up a visit." And so it was a part of one of our days that week that we attended to do some leadership stuff to go and visit the orphanage. So we spent the first half or like a couple days kind of traveling and then going to the Taj Mahal, and then the church there hosted us, and which was very very nice. But they had in the initial visit they had told me, "Okay, well, we can only have one person go with you to your visit." And I was shocked. I was like, "What happened? Why?" Um, they're like, "Think about like who you would want from this group to go with you." And so I was a little upset. And then the pastor's wife of the church, like, kind of came up to me and was like, "Also, we want you to share like your story with some younger sex trafficking women who've been rescued from sex trafficking. And so we want you to be prepared to do that. And I need you to wear like traditional clothing. I had all these thoughts going through my head of like, how do I navigate this? Like, they told me I can only choose one person. I think my whole group is going to get to go. Now I got to figure out how to share my story. And one of the things, I think we all have things that we tell God we're not going to do. And that was one of them. I was like, there is just no way I'm going to share my story to people in India. So that was something for the next couple of days I wrestled with God with back and forth, staying up late, trying to figure out what am I gonna do? And I remember it was in the middle of the week, it was the orphanage visit, and it just felt like everything that day went wrong. Timing, we were late, we needed translators because we didn't know the language they were gonna speak. I ended up asking my friend Kate, who I went to college with and we were in the same sorority, to join me because they just felt like, okay, maybe just someone who can observe and kind of let you have your moment. And I was like, okay. And so we were supposed to be leaving and we don't have our driver. And I'm like, this is not going to work out. We're going to miss we had things scheduled throughout the whole day and I was going to miss my next event. The next event was starting and we don't have people there to pick us up. And then we don't have a translator that speaks this language. Okay. So we got to find that. So the car ride there, finally, someone came to the car ride there. Um, was interesting because we couldn't find the orphanage. And I'm not sure if our listeners are aware, but driving in India is just a sport, in all honesty. So,
And you survived that, right?
and I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I'm like, I can tell we're lost. We don't know where we're at. I am with people I don't really know. My phone is not working, so I can't, get a hold of anybody to figure out, oh, are we in the right spot? And finally, I was like, you know what? We just need to turn around. But I didn't know. I was like, okay. And my friend Kate looked at me and she's like, I think that's the orphanage right there. And she's like, we need to pull over. And so they were like, yes, that's it. That's it. And I'm in traditional clothing, which I never wear, but we had all stopped at the beginning of the trip and got a couple of outfits. And so I wore that outfit. And I remember walking up, this guard led us up some stairs and made us take our shoes off, which I thought was always, interesting, but it is a respect thing culturally. And I had no idea what was happening. I was like, this is not the orphanage. I'm about to be interrogated. I don't know what's happening. We walk up to this room and it's me, my friend Kate, and two translators with me. And there's a circle of chairs. And I was like, yep, I'm about to be interrogated. I was sweating. I was nervous because I didn't really know because there was some things leading up to that visit that they had asked some questions about. And I was like, okay, that's valid. Like, ask the questions. But it was via email and I didn't really know what to expect in all honesty. And I'm already irritated because we have now missed our next event and no one really knows what's happening. So we sit down and I looked at my friend Kate and I was like, I'm about to be interrogated. And this lady walks up to me and I am just like, "What?" And it blew me away because the lady that approached me was the lady that brought me over to America. And I didn't ask for that. For in all honesty, I didn't even know she was still alive. So she had introduced herself, and my brain was rambling with so many thoughts that I looked at my friend Kate and I was like, "What did she say her name was?" And she's like, "She said her name was Anju." And I was like, "That is the lady that brought me over to America." And I just remember her like holding my cheeks because that's all she could do was just put her hands on my cheeks and she's just weeping. And I'm like, "Whoa, are you okay?" And she's like, I just didn't know if you were still alive." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, like, you know who I am." And she's like, "Yes, I know your parents." And she was like, "Your parents are Alan and Susan." And I was like, "Yes." And she's like, "Please tell me you have a better life." And I just started crying because I was like, I do. Like, I really, truly do. And I didn't even know how to describe it to her. I'm like, I'm in college. I'm about to receive my bachelor's degree. Like, I have these goals and they're so attainable and they feel that way. Um, it was just a moment of like, man, that was God because I didn't ask for that. I thought I was gonna be holding babies and just looking around the orphanage.
Taking a little visit, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
visit where I was, where I came from. Yeah.
And so I was just taken aback and she was like, "Well, I sent you the questions because I was trying to find out if I could get more information on your birth family or your birth mom." And I was like, I'm not interested. If you do, great. If you don't." And she remembered her trip to Oklahoma and she just was so happy to see that I was happy and to see that I was like living this, full life and blessed life. And so it was just, excuse me, one of those moments that I just didn't expect. And so I was just trying to like comprehend. I didn't need a translator because I understood everything that she was saying. And it was just a very powerful moment to see someone, that had brought me over and cared for me in that orphanage. Like she cared for me. She changed my diapers. She fed me. She made sure I was well. She made sure that I stayed, healthy enough to come over to America. And so I remember we ended up leaving the orphanage and all of these like anxieties and worries just kind of disappeared. I remember just thinking like, "Whoa, I didn't orchestrate that. Like only God did." And so I it was funny because it was, I believe when we left it was like Mother's Day or we were coming up on Mother's Day. And I called my mom and I think it was before the orphanage visit. My mom was like, "Well, if you see the lady that took care of you, like, let me know." And I kinda, like, cut my mom off, and I was like, "There's no way I'm gonna see her. Like, why would you even bring that up?" You know?
Yeah.
And then I was like, "Okay." And so, when that moment happened, I could not wait to call my mom and tell her. I'm like, "Whoa, I saw on you, the lady that took care of me, and just as a young adult, did not have that expectation." And it was just a wild, like a wild
Wow. Powerful story. I don't know if I can add anything to that. It's just so the goodness of God, is like gave you more than you deserved in the moment when you doubted, when you wanted to quit, when you wanted to turn that car around. This is not working out. And I even think too about the details of Kate being with you, of like, if it would have been anybody else, would they have saw that that was the orphanage, And so, and I love too about Anju to think what she has carried over 2 decades, like, that somebody really loved and cared for you when you were in that orphanage and then to have this, like, full circle moment with
Mhm.
her. Absolutely amazing, and like you said, only God. Have you stayed in contact, or has there been any follow-up, or were you like not that, like, closure, but anything after?
No, I haven't, and I've thought, I'm like, "Maybe I do need to see if I can reach out and reconnect."
Yeah, I didn't know, and not that it's necessary, I just didn't after you, like, met once and obviously you were 20 at the time,
Mhm.
so yeah. Well, is there anything else that you want to share about your story? And then I'll ask you a couple of questions as we end.
So, in that trip, I mentioned it is the pastor was like, "I want you to share your story with these young girls."
Yes.
And like I said, I wrestled with it because I can share my story to the person at the gas station. I can share my story. I feel pretty comfortable sharing my story with almost anybody. But when you think about people in a third world country and they're asking me to share my story, I was like, God, I cannot do that.
Why do you think that was? What was the barrier or the doubt for you?
It felt, and this was hard for me to understand, and I think still to this day, I'm like, "Okay, that was the Lord," because I felt like I was more fortunate than them. And I'm like, "How do I tell these girls who have went through harder things that I get to live a life in America?" So it was, I can't remember everything that I said when I spoke to them, but it was the most touching, hardest, rewarding thing I have ever done. And my team just kept reminding me, like everyone's given different opportunities and yours just looks different. And so it just was hard to say like, okay, this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to tell them that this is what I do, but let them know like they have the opportunity to do some amazing things. And so looking at it from that perspective, it made it a little bit easier. But I never, in that situation, I never wanted someone to look at my story and be like, well, why wasn't it me? But I think we can do that here and now. We can play that why wasn't it me or why them, and I think that's where it really comes into connection of like, okay, like the Lord really has his hand on my life, but he also has his hand on their life because they were saved from some pretty traumatic things. That was something that I didn't expect, but it was the Holy Spirit was like with me through the whole thing and got to talk to some amazing women afterwards when I got done.
Yeah, what I love about what you shared is, and we do this in giving, like it's a gift. God calls us to give sometimes really hard gifts. And He was calling you at that time to share your story, and we try to rationalize, like, well, I don't want to share my story because I have it so good and what they've went through. And I think that's where trust comes in when we know what God is calling us to do and we start making it about like us or trying to foresee what somebody's reaction is going to be. And it's like we don't control somebody's reaction or what they receive, but knowing that if God called us to do something or to share our story is He will use it for good, even if it was just one of those women. I don't know how many women were there.
I mean, there's like 20.
Yeah. So you think about, if there was 20 and 19 were mad at you or jealous or whatever, but there was one woman that it changed the course of her life or her mindset or led her to God and you're sharing your story, like it's worth it. But sometimes we rob that gift because we have our fears and anxieties of our own. So what do you think it was for you to, like, get that final courage to go, "Okay, I'm gonna really do this," and basically take a step of faith in that?
Yeah, I think it was just really just to share about the Lord, to show them like the Lord did this incredible thing and like he can do it in different ways or a way for you and um just showing them I had no control over that. I didn't get to determine where it ended up, but it was God who did that and just really pointing it to him to show them like the same God that I serve, like you guys serve, and this is what he's done. So it was just trying to tie it back into that is I want to share my story not only to, bring awareness to adoption or families, but to show people that my story is because of God. Um, and I didn't share this like in the beginning, but like my mom said, they didn't make a lot of money. They barely made enough to get by. And she's like, your dad did, what he needed to do, but she's like, it was God who provided in that moment. It was God who opened the doors and, got you here, which is crazy. It's crazy true, really. It's like, okay, yeah, I don't know how it all happened, but God did that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that in because I think we can let money or our location, whatever, fill in the blank of what some people would use as an excuse for not doing what God called them to do. And He is the great provider. And if He called you to do it, He will figure out a way that will make no sense to us. We will not be able to figure out, rationalize it. And I love that about their story because it's not like, hey, we were a wealthy American family. We wrote a couple of checks and Toshali came over here. It was like, no, they didn't have the money to adopt you, but your mom really felt like that's what the Lord was calling her to do. And her obedience and faithfulness not only changed your life, but I know it changed your family's life. It changed your friends. I know you've changed my life, your story. Like everybody, if you're watching this on video, is Toshali has a light, and it is the light of Jesus Christ that shines through her. And, we all got to experience and impact that. But it took a lot of courage for your family to do that and have faith. So thank you for sharing that piece. As we wrap up, is there a Bible verse or a praise song or a praise and worship song that is kind of like you cling to or is in
Yeah.
your life right now?
So one verse that really just really helps me, and I will explain a little bit, is Galatians 1:10. It says, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God, or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I'd not be a servant of Christ." And so, um, I feel like that is just something that I really try to stand on, because I think there are times where I do try to please people, or I get in my head like I don't look like everybody else, or I have different demographics, or X, Y, and Z. Like I don't know my birth mom, or just things that sometimes get to me of when people want answers or people want to feel like they're pleased. I have to remember this, because again, it goes back to like the Lord brought me here, and I'm trying to only please him, and I'm trying to be a servant for him. If I were trying to please people, my life would look so different. And so that has just been a verse that, that's how I really look at that and stand on that, is being adopted and having this label of adoption is like one of the greatest things I could have ever asked for. And I think the older that I get, it looks a little different. I share it a little bit differently, but it had something that I every day, and something that when I met you, it was just like you have this like gratitude that exceeds what the average person has. And it just stood out to me because I'm like, I feel like every day I thank God that I was adopted. I thank Jesus every day. And it feels like sometimes the things that I have I don't deserve, but I want to make sure I thank God for. And that's something that you really instilled, I feel like, in us when we were in Alaska, is just how grateful you were for the things that you have. What's your gratitude today? And that is just like, not only am I adopted, but I have this and I have that, and I'm able to have this, I'm healthy, just things in the everyday that, like you said, some people may take for granted. So that, and then my song that I just, day to day listen to is Trust in God by Elevation Worship. And it just talks about, like when things go different, trust in God. When you're believing for something, you trust in God. And so that is just something that has really gotten me through some really difficult times, and something that, not even during the difficult times, but I remember that when things are going great, I trust in God still.
I love that. I think that is a perfect way to wrap up. So, Toshali, I appreciate you telling your only God story. It's a story that only He could write.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, friends. Thank you for joining me today on the Only God podcast. I hope today's story encouraged your faith and reminded you that God is still writing our stories each and every day. If you were inspired by this episode, please share, subscribe, and tell a friend. And to stay connected with me and find out about all my books and resources and events, go to shineforwardcreative.com. Have a fabulous day.